Hello, I'm Riley Carlson. It's 22 GMT, and you're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, live from Doha. Here are the latest developments.
For 40 years, we're protecting you, and you don't want to get involved in something that is very minor.
Frustrated over lack of progress on an armada to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, U.S. President Donald Trump scolds allies and urges others to do more. U.S. allies in Europe and Asia reject Trump's demands to send warships to the strait and be drawn into the conflict. U.S. and Israeli forces continue to pound parts of Iran, hitting major cities, including the capital, Tehran. In Lebanon, Israel begins its ground offensive in the south. The conflict with Hezbollah has already killed at least 850 people and displaced more than 1 million. And Baghdad's renowned Al Rashid Hotel comes under a drone attack. Thank you for joining us. The U.S. is facing growing isolation over its plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran effectively blocked the key shipping route after the U.S. and Israel attacked it on February 28th. 1/5 of the world's crude oil and liquefied natural gas normally pass through that channel. President Donald Trump has now called on countries to send warships and minesweepers to ensure that the tankers can transit safely. But he's been frustrated at the lack of support.
We have 45,000 troops in Japan. We have 45,000 troops in South Korea. We have 45,000, 50,000 troops in Germany. We defend all these countries. And then, do you have any minesweepers? And they say, well, would it be possible for us not to get involved? We spend trillions and trillions of dollars on NATO to defend other countries. And I always said, but if it ever comes time to defend us, they're not going to be there.
Iran's foreign minister insists that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed for an
plays a key role in safeguarding the freedom of navigation. There was, in our discussions, a clear wish to strengthen this operation, but for the time being, there was no appetite in changing the mandate of the Operation Aspides for now.
Der NATO.
It was therefore clear at the moment that this war is not a matter for NATO. Secretary-General Mark Rutte has already emphasized this. I wish to expressly endorse that view. Nor did the United States of America and Israel consult us prior to this war. As for Iran, there has never been a joint decision on whether to take action. That is why the question of how Germany might contribute militarily does not arise. We will not be doing so.
Iran's foreign minister insists that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed for enemies, including Washington and its allies. Disruption of the vital shipping route has wreaked havoc on energy markets.
On the first day, they carried out a massive wave of attacks and demanded unconditional surrender. And now, after roughly 15 days since the war began, they are turning to others for help regarding the security of the Strait of Hormuz, to those whom until yesterday they considered enemies. Of course, from our perspective, it's open. It's only closed to our enemies, to those who carried out unjust aggression against our country and to their allies.
On the ground in Iran, the unrelenting U.S. and Israeli attacks continue. These were the scenes in Tehran, where emergency crews scrambled to rescue people trapped under the rubble. Airstrikes hit once again in several parts of the city. The Iranian Red Crescent says at least one of those strikes destroyed a residential area. Iran's health ministry says nearly 19,000 civilians have been injured since the first attacks on February 28th, and almost 1,500 people have been killed. We are covering developments from Tehran, Beirut, Amman, Doha, and from Washington, D.C. But first, this report from our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett.
With oil prices spiking, U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday publicly pressured foreign leaders, expressing frustration. None has been enthusiastic about helping to escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz.
Numerous countries have told me they're on the way. Some are very enthusiastic about it, and some aren't. Some are countries that we've helped for many, many years. We've protected them.
Trump argues countries like Japan and China, who rely on most of their oil traveling through the strait, have an obligation to help secure it after it was effectively shut down by Iran. Since the U.S. and Israel launched war on Iran, gas prices have gone up by almost $1 in many U.S. states. That's 30% more than many Americans were paying just a month ago. As U.S. allies balk at sending warships, Trump had this response.
Maybe they don't want to be targeted, but I say, wouldn't matter if you're targeted or not, because this is a paper tiger that we're dealing with now. It wasn't a paper tiger 2 weeks ago.
Trump told reporters the U.S. military has struck more than 7,000 Iranian targets, destroying Iranian missile and drone manufacturing plants. Asked whether the conflict could end soon and whether he'd be willing to talk to the Iranians.
Look, all of their leaders are dead, as far as we know, but they're all dead. We don't know who we're dealing with.
The Israeli military has projected strikes on Iran could continue for several more weeks. But Trump insists Israel's not considering using a nuclear weapon should the war escalate.
Israel wouldn't do that. Israel would never do that.
Donald Trump is expected to continue his pressure campaign on foreign leaders. On Thursday, Japan's prime minister will meet here at the White House with the U.S. president, where it's expected they'll discuss Trump's call to dispatch warships to the Strait of Hormuz. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
John Holman joins us now live from Washington, D.C. John, the president is obviously very frustrated that he's not getting the support that he wants from allies to help open up the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, he is. He signalled out for particular anger, actually, the United Kingdom, saying that it was before it was known as a Rolls-Royce style ally, and now that it isn't so much. He said that it sent or said that it would send aircraft carriers too late. But he's also talked about countries like China, South Korea, especially China. He said, well, they get a lot of their oil through the Strait of Hormuz, so they should, or we would expect perhaps them to help us more in protecting it. One thing that is interesting about this is that the US Secretary of Treasury was actually talking late last week in an interview, and he said that he understood that China-flagged ships were actually still getting through the Strait of Hormuz. That ties into what Iran said about this, that we won't stop all shipping, we'll just stop the shipping that's allied to the United States and Israel. They haven't really said which countries they consider as allies and that they would stop. But definitely this is a moment in which President Trump is frustrated. He's basically said in an address not so long ago, well, we would defend you when you needed it, especially talking to his European allies and NATO partners, but you're not defending us. I think the response from that, especially from his opponents, is this isn't defence, this is an attack that you've launched. This is a war of choice, and we don't necessarily have to get involved in that. But definitely a situation in which the US itself has said that it can't escort ships yet, that it has to wait till it's military able to do that. And obviously President Trump wants to share some of that risk with other countries.
And in the meantime, John, that creates more uncertainty for not only the cost of oil, but the markets in general and the cost of goods and livelihoods in America and abroad. What did the president have to say about that?
Well, he said what he said all along, actually, that the price of gas is going to come down. He said, one, that he's surprised that it hasn't risen more. And he said that as soon as this conflict is over, then that will come down. But he hasn't actually given a timescale for when the conflict will end. He was coming out in the afternoon and saying that the objective is still to prevent the Iranians from getting nuclear weapons. Quite a lot of military experts have said, well, the only way to do that and get that highly enriched uranium would be some sort of ground force going into Iran, even if it was just in a surgical strike, which is no mean feat. So the costs of it. So one thing is the timescale of the war. Already, just yesterday, Kevin Hassett, who's the director of the U.S. National Economic Council, said that it had been $12 billion so far for the administration. But of course, there are those gas prices for the American public. There's possibly food costs and other costs going forwards. And we're not so far away from the midterm elections this autumn, which President Trump cares about very much. much, and so does his party, the Republicans. There's the other cost of this, the more grave one, that of body bags coming back to the United States. So far, we're at 13 US service members who have been killed. 200, it's been reported, that have been injured, although the vast majority of those, about 180, have returned to service. So obviously not gravely wounded. But if this carries on, if there is some sort of ground force, then obviously those numbers will increase. And that's also a cost that ordinary Americans just don't like to see.
John Holman live in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Let's go now to Tehran and Ali Hashim, who joins us live. But Iran's message, Ali, they've been doubling down on their message on the Strait of Hormuz to the president, which is it's not closed, it's just closed for you.
Well, indeed, this is what the foreign minister said, as we heard from him. And it's the mandate that the supreme leader stated in his first statement when he mentioned the strait directly. And that was a clear order to the military to start their efforts to weaponize the strait. Now, weaponization of the Strait of Hormuz is having a huge impact because Iran doesn't want to give Trump the success of a limited war. They want to create a kind of a leverage for themselves and a liability on Trump, whereas this is becoming, first of all, it's already a regional conflict, and it's turning into an international crisis with prices of oil rising and situation in a kind of another getting out of control. Today also we had reports from the U.S. on possible negotiations or talks, at least, between the Americans and the Iranians. But Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi tweeted just a few minutes ago refuting these reports and saying that they are meant to cheat oil sellers and the oil market.
A message to the President of the United States. The outcome of war cannot be determined by tweets. The result of a war is determined in the field, the very place where you and your forces do not dare to approach, and you can only talk about it in your tweets. It's better to name this war as epic fear instead of epic fury.
But Ali, obviously, as all of this diplomatic posturing is happening between Washington and Tehran, the people in Iran are still bearing this intense bombardment. What can you tell us about the strikes that have hit there today?
Well, there have been several strikes today. At least in the morning, we saw a huge one in the center of Tehran. There were another couple in the north of the city, also in several cities. In Shiraz, there was a huge airstrike. Also, there are reports of other strikes in several areas around the country. However, now what we know is that the country is dealing with a situation of war in every and each province. Almost 28 out of 31 provinces have been attacked by the United States and Israel. On the other hand, it seems that there is an attempt by the state in Iran to try and normalize the situation, whereas we can see shops opening, we can see life relatively getting back to norm. Very different contrast from what used to be during the 12-day war last year.
Ali Hashim, our thanks to you in Tehran. Canada, France, Germany, and the UK have issued a joint statement warning against a major Israeli ground offensive in Lebanon. Israel announced on Monday that it had launched ground operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. It says it's targeting the armed group's key strongholds there. The ground operations were preceded by airstrikes. More than 1 million people in Lebanon have been displaced by Israeli military operations there in the past 2 weeks. Heidi Pett is live for us in Beirut. Heidi, what more can you tell us about this ground offensive?
So this announcement by Israel today is merely confirmation of something that's actually been going on for some time now in southern Lebanon. You mentioned the airstrikes that preceded this. That has been ongoing since the beginning of the renewal of hostilities, and in fact actually before, during what was termed a ceasefire, but the residents of southern Lebanon certainly didn't experience it as such. But this now is confirmation that Israeli troops are operating on the ground inside southern Lebanon, which they have been doing, in fact, for the last week or more. We're seeing clashes concentrated around the town of Hiam which is a hilltop town. It's very strategically important. The Israeli army has been making attempts to enter, capture and control that town for a number of days now. We've had a statement in the last little while from Hezbollah saying that they continue to engage Israeli forces on the ground there. They've been saying that again for many, many days now. They said they fired rockets at Israeli forces inside that town at 9:30 on Monday evening. And they are also claiming that they attacked some tanks, Israeli tanks that were operating inside the town of Tabor, also just close there along the Israeli border. So what we're seeing is a confirmation and an expansion of the Israeli ground operation in southern Lebanon. And of course, this comes in the context of this massive forced evacuation order that has been issued by Israel, telling all Lebanese citizens who are south of the Zahrani River that they need to evacuate their homes under immediate threat of Israeli airstrikes or indeed ground forces.
Now, Heidi, we're seeing these calls from European countries and Canada to de-escalate this situation. Where does the Lebanese government stand with going through any talks?
So the Lebanese government has expressed that they are actually willing and open to engage in talks with Israel. In the past, these kind of talks have been going through an interlocutor. The last ceasefire was mediated by the US, but they have expressed that they are actually open to speaking directly with Israel, which is very significant. These two countries have been in a state of war officially for some decades now. So that is quite a significant overture that they have made by declaring that they'd be open to that. So we've got that from the Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, and also the President. But crucially, what's missing is a senior political representative for the Shia community here in Lebanon. And Nabih Berri, he is the Speaker of Parliament, he is the most senior political leader here, has said that it wouldn't be appropriate to engage in those discussions, to talk about ceasefire negotiations under fire. So while Israeli airstrikes continue, while the ground operation continues, while more than 1 million people now are officially displaced, that those talks would not be appropriate. And of course, the other player that we really need to talk about here in Lebanon is Hezbollah themselves, who are engaged militarily with Israel on the ground. And what we've seen from their most recent public statements is they're striking a very defiant tone. You know, the Lebanese government has tried to outlaw those military operations. They've declared them illegal, and yet they continue. And the last public statement that we had from their Secretary General, Naim Qassem, was very defiant, saying that they were waging a legitimate battle here in Lebanon and one that they expected to continue for a long time.
Heidi Pett, live in Beirut. Thank you. Let's go to Rory Challens now, who's in Jordan's capital, Amman. So, Rory, obviously the other side of would-be talks to de-escalate here is the Israeli side. What are they saying about the prospect?
Well, we've had really mixed signals from the Israelis in the last few days about any talks between Israel and Lebanon, direct talks. It would be, as Heidi was saying, they're unprecedented for Lebanon to be recognized or to recognize Israel. In the recent days, we have heard the foreign minister saying that there are no plans talks with Lebanon. But then, on the other hand, Benjamin Netanyahu has appointed Ron Dermer, who's one of his top fixers, to head up the Lebanese brief, and there were reports that he had gone across to Saudi Arabia to try and sort of set the groundwork for those talks to take place. And we heard from the French President Emmanuel Macron, who was offering France as a platform, as a host for any direct negotiations, and the French had some proposals that they were putting forward as well. And we can hear what Israel's President Isaac Herzog has said in response to that just now.
I think it's a very positive development. I think it's very important that there should be talks. As the Israeli government confirmed, there will be talks. The talks are very important because it's about time we have an opportunity of moving forward with Lebanon.
But as of now, there is no date set for these talks, and there are no terms agreed. Heidi was just taking us through the complications from the Lebanese side in any direct negotiations there. On the Israeli side, well, you've got the military who on the ground in Lebanon are saying that they are not going to stop their campaign against Hezbollah until Hezbollah is disarmed. So there might be the architecture there for negotiations, but nobody yet is walking through the door.
Yeah, and in the meantime, Israel is still taking strikes from both fronts, from Hezbollah and also from Iran. It looked to be some pretty significant strikes in Israel today. Rory, what can you tell us about those?
Yeah, well, sirens and alerts and running to the shelter. This is the new pattern of life, certainly in many parts of Israel, particularly the north, which is taking 100 rockets per day from Hezbollah. And then, this is compounded in other parts of the country as well by Iran sending over an average of 10 salvos of missiles a day at the moment. The Israeli government is trying to inch the country back towards some degree of normalcy. A couple of weeks ago, workplaces opened again after being shut in the early stages of the war. And today there was a new system set up for schools to reopen with a traffic light system designating which areas are high risk, which areas are low risk, where you can open, where you can't. But that has had some pushback from local authorities, with some mayors, but notably the mayor of Haifa, saying absolutely no way, not opening schools here, definitely not safe enough. And 40% of schools in the country can't get their kids into a shelter in time anyway. So while most Israelis are behind this war, they see it as absolutely necessary, a job worth doing, the strains on the country are very real.
Rory Challen's live for us in Amman, Jordan. Thank you, Rory. Iran has kept up its strikes on Gulf countries. In the UAE, a drone attack at the Shah oil field in Abu Dhabi has caused a fire. One person was killed in another missile attack, also in Abu Dhabi, earlier on Monday. And a drone incident near Dubai airport set fire to a fuel tank. There have also been 2 rounds of attacks on Doha. Qatar's foreign ministry spokesman says Iran is targeting civilian facilities.
Let me make it very clear. Since the Iranian attacks have started on Qatar, the threats and the attacks on civilian targets have not stopped. These attacks are ongoing every day, and the threat to civilians is ongoing every day. The fact that we had to evacuate, civilians and students and faculty during the weekend is just one realization of what this means for the people who are living in these conditions. But we also assert that we have been able to this point, due to the bravery of the people in our armed forces, to withstand all of these threats and attacks.
Al Jazeera's Malik Traina is live for us here in Doha. Malik, what can you tell us about the latest attacks across the Gulf? Because I understand that Kuwait is dealing with some incoming at the moment.
That's right. They just announced that they're intercepting, or alarms have sounded, and they're trying to intercept these attacks, drones perhaps. They've said before that if any explosions are heard, they're from interceptions. Just earlier today, you mentioned the UAE and Qatar, but Saudi Arabia also dozens of interceptions of drones in the Al Kharj district, also in Riyadh, and in the eastern province, which is home to the Al Shaiba oil field. Bahrain also witnessed a few drones, 3 drones and 4 missiles today. There's been a wide array of attacks against the Gulf. And we heard from the foreign ministry earlier, he called on Iran to stop these attacks. Look, there's the security implications, but there's also the economic implications. Some analysts are saying, with the Strait of Hormuz being closed, that the Gulf and Iraq are losing out on or cutting production of nearly 10 billion barrels per day, losing billions of dollars in lost revenue. There's also the psychological aspect, right? That Doha, other cities like Abu Dhabi and the UAE, they're among the safest cities in the entire world. Last year, Abu Dhabi and Doha were ranked in the top 10 safest cities around the world. So people here aren't really used to this, used to these kinds of threats. I was talking to somebody earlier today. She was a Canadian. She's lived here in Qatar for more than 10 years, and she was saying that I'm starting, I can see that I'm starting to have PTSD. So I think as this, conflict extends, hopefully not, people here hope that it doesn't, but we're going to start seeing the mental aspect, the mental health aspect So people here across the region are praying that this conflict will end.
Malik Traina, live in Doha. Thank you, Malik. Explosions have been heard near the U.S. Embassy in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. A fire broke out on the roof of Al Rashid Hotel in central Baghdad, caused by a drone. Security forces have cordoned off the area and closed the roads. The Iraqi Interior Minister says there have been no casualties. The hotel is inside Baghdad's so-called green zone. We'll get more from Al Jazeera's Mahmoud Abdelwahed.
An explosive-laden drone attacked the Rashid Hotel or Royal Tulip Hotel in the heavily fortified Green Zone area in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. Security sources say that the drone attack hit the rooftop of the hotel, causing only material damage without any human casualties reported. Now, the Al Rashid Hotel, which is home to foreign diplomatic missions, including the European Union mission, a Saudi diplomatic mission, and also other foreign employees at oil companies. The hotel is not far from the U.S. Embassy, which came under attack similar attack 2 days ago. Now, following this attack, security forces have been deployed in the area, blocking all the roads leading to the green zone with blocks and also armored vehicles. This attack comes after a counterattack believed to be carried out by U.S. and Israeli airstrikes that targeted locations of the popular mobilization units in Al-Qa'im crossing terminal between Iraq and Syria, killing and wounding a number of popular mobilization units military personnel. Elsewhere in Erbil, another similar drone attack was intercepted before reaching the U.S. consulate in Erbil, and in Jarf al-Sakhar area, north of the Babel province and south of the capital Baghdad, another location belonging to the popular mobilization units was targeted again. Now, since the beginning of the military campaign by Israel and the United States on Iran-aligned armed groups have been targeting U.S. military bases and facilities, including the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad and the consulate in Erbil, dozens and dozens of times, also against U.S. military bases and facilities across Iraq. Mahmoud Abdelwahed, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
War has taken its toll on citizens across Iran. Small business owner Farhad Sharifi has